It is 6:30 on 7 February 2023. This is the time for the committee meeting of the Northern Lebanon School District Board of Directors. We meet as a committee of the whole. I call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda tonight is presentations for this evening. Dr. Messinger, do you want to run us through these?
Yeah, we're going to start with, it's my understanding you guys brought snacks for us while you present. Is that right? Oh, okay. Our annual audit report. They're going to go through the 2020. I think we were trying to get you last month, but it didn't work out. So thank you for coming. We're going to start with that. You guys are first, and you don't have to stay after you're done then either. So there's a microphone there if you want it. And is there, I know everybody has papers in front of them. Is there a PowerPoint as well? Yep, looks like it.
Well, good evening and thanks for having us. We're going to go through the 2022 annual report. You should have the actual financial statement package. That's the one that's bound, and as well as the slides that we're going to go through on the presentation.
And that's 84 pages. So we'll summarize it here with the PowerPoint.
So we'll start with slide 2 is kind of an explanation of the audit report that did change from last year. If you notice, if you get to look at that. So the opinions are actually the first paragraph, and we gave the school district an unmodified opinion, which is the highest opinion we're allowed to give. There's a second paragraph that talks about the basis of the opinions, what standards are used when we do an audit. There's also a paragraph about a change in accounting principles. So this has kind of been happening almost every year. We got another big change. There was an implementation of GASB number 87, which is the lease standard. So that took place this year. Let you know that took place. There's also a paragraph about management's responsibilities for the financial statements. And there's a much longer, detailed explanation of the auditor's responsibility. Explains what our objectives are. Excuse me, I'm getting a little hoarse, but I have my water here if I start to need it. So it explains what our objectives are and the processes we use when we do the audit. There's a lot of required supplementary information included in these in the reports. There's a paragraph that explains that, what procedures we completed in relation to the management discussion and analysis, which is the first 14 pages, I believe, 4 to 14, and supplementary information that's required by GASB with these statements. There's also supplementary information by the Pennsylvania that's required in here, and that's included, and we talk about that. And then there's lets a reader know on that last paragraph about the Yellow Book opinion that's included in here as well. And we're going to go over that later. Slide 4 talks about, explains about the management's discussion analysis. That's pages 4 to 14 in the bound package. It's prepared by management. There's comparative numbers there. There's some graphs and charts. So it's a good place to go to get an idea of what took place during the year. So we definitely highly recommend that you take a look at that. Slide 5 is the first set of statements, the government-wide statements. There's a chart which is included here. So this gives you a chart of the 2 years against each other. So a statement of net position for 2022 against 2021 on the government-wide statements. The government-wide statements are kind of that full accrual statements that show all your debt, show all your fixed assets. So they're the first set of statements we're going to go through. The first one is the statement of net position. We're going to talk about that. So your total assets and deferred outflows are 129.7 million. That's an increase of 59.3 million from the prior year. As we said, there was a new standard release, the lease standard, that caused your assets to go up. As you know, you have a capital project going, that caused your net assets to go up. And you had some leftover bond proceeds, actually cash left over from the bond proceeds, which you're going to use on your capital project. And that, of course, caused the net assets to go up. Total assets are 117.6 million. That's an increase of 56.8 million from last year, which was 60.8 million. Your deferred outflows are 12.1 million, an increase of 2.5 million from the year before. Total liabilities are 154.2 million. That's an increase of 52.2 million from last year, which last year I believe was 102 million. And there was the new standard that was included in here, and as well as you had a new bond issue this year. So that was $36 million. So that was the reason the liabilities went up. Deferred inflows are 8.8 million, an increase of 6.6 million from last year. And that's mostly related to your pension reporting from PUSES. Your net position or deficit is 33.25 deficit this year. Last year, the reported deficit was 33.76. So a decrease in the deficit of 512,000. So that's a good thing.
Heading in the right direction.
And we know why we have a deficit, because of the pension plan and the OPEB liability. So your OPEB liability is not as big as other states, because you do the state of Pennsylvania does fund that, but the pension liability is underfunded. So that's causing the district's portion to cause you to have a deficit. Slide 7 is kind of a pie chart. It talks about the statement, so it's covering the statement of activities and changes in that position. So that kind of gives you the 2 years against each other. You can see the comparative, as we would expect. Slide 8 is the statement of activities. That's the next statement we're going to cover, and changes in net position. So the district's net function and programs totaled 33.4 million. Last year was 32.1 million. So with a government, expenses and programs are always shown at the top, and then revenues to pay for those programs are shown at the bottom. Slide 9 is a pie chart of this for the statement of activities, which is covering the revenues, right? Yes. And then slide 10, we're going to go through the
And again, the revenue chart's very similar, but yes, and then we have highlights here.
So this will cover the statement of activities and changes in that position. So general revenues were 34.3 million. That's an increase of 2.3 million from last year. Property and other tax revenue increased 1.2 million. Grants, subsidies, and contributions increased 916,000. Interest income increased 16,000. That's because you had the bond proceeds left over, which you had got some interest income from that. Miscellaneous increased $130,000 from the year before. So the difference between the net costs and functions of the program, which was 33.4 million, and your general revenues, which were 34.3 million, was an increase in net position of $919,000. The restatement for the new GASB caused your net position to decrease by $407,000, but the total deficit did shrink from the year before, as we went through on the last statement we covered. Slide 11 is the government statements that we're going to cover. So the first one is the balance sheet for the government funds. That's page 18 in your bound book. General fund had a fund balance of 5.5 million. That's an increase of 720,000 from the prior year. Your capital fund had a fund balance of 36.1 million. That's from the bond proceeds from the new 2002 capital projects. So that's the reason that's got a fund balance. And you're spending it right now on a new capital project. That service fund does not have a fund balance, no change from the prior year. Your miscellaneous special revenue fund has a fund balance of 67,000, about the same as last year. And that includes your scholarship accounts that are held in this fund. There's a reconciliation between the two approaches. We're not going to cover that. It's page 19 in the bound book. Slide 12 is your statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. We'll go through a little bit of that. Your operating surplus in the general fund this year was 720,000. Prior year had a surplus of $452,000. Your capital project fund received the proceeds from the general obligation bond, the series 2022, in the amount of $36 million. There was a transfer from the general fund of about $576,000. And there were expenditures on the 22 capital project of $24.1 million, leaving a surplus of $12.5 million to be spent on the ongoing capital project
And
through
this
this
is
year.
looking at it at June 30th, 2022. So I'm sure much of that has been expended since that time.
Your debt service fund paid $1.5 million of principal payments and $825,000 for interest and finance charges. The district incurred bond issuance costs on the 2022 bond in the amount of about $1,052,000. And you received the bond premium on the 22 bond of $1.6 million. So the bond premium will be recognized over the life of the bond in decreasing your interest expense. The bond issuance costs are recognized right up front. There's a reconciliation of the two approaches. So that's on page 21 of your bound package there. Slide 13 shows kind of a trend in your food service. I mean, this is just important to look at because you can see how it's dramatically changed.
Yeah, it's kind of at the very end. You can see how that shoots right up there. So your revenues are the blue and they're going up higher than the red, which is the expenses. So that's really turned around. The last year we've turned into a surplus.
So that was a decision that you made to kind of outsource that, and it's
So
paying off.
This covers 16 years. That trend there.
So we go through that. That was slide 13. Slide 14 is statement of net position of propriety fund. So there's a statement just for the food service, and that's called the proprietary fund. That's on page 22. Shows the financial position of the food service operations. Net position increased $182,000 from the prior year for a positive net position of $171,000. So last year we just almost broke even. I think we had a negative 11,000 net position. This year we're over the top. We've got a positive net position of 171,000.
And there was no subsidy required from the general fund for the school fund. And this is the first year. So that was quite a hurdle.
Fantastic. The statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position for the food service fund is on page 23. The food service had a gain of 181,000, no general fund subsidy, as Pam talked about, and net position is 171,000. Because it's a proprietary fund, there's a statement of cash flows that's required. That's on page 24. We won't cover that. Slide 15 talks about that new standard, the adoption of the lease standard. So that's GASB number 87 leases. So it's a recognition of certain lease assets and liabilities that were previously classified as operating leases or contract expenses. The standard establishes a single model for lease accounting based on the foundational principle that leases are financing of the right to use an underlying asset. So even though it's kind of a rent payment, it's kind of they're looking at it as a right to use an asset. So you're booking an asset and a liability.
And that explained the big change with those government-wide statements.
So that was adopted this year. There's a lot of notes to the financial statement. They go from pages 27 to 62. Don't worry, we're not going to cover them all.
Yeah.
But we'll give you the big ones. So capitalization policy is note 1. That's on page 31. Kind of gives a reader what the capitalization policy is for the district when you book fixed assets. New accounting standards and an adoption of upcoming standards is on page 34. Your capital asset note is note 6, page 39. Summarizes the district's capital assets for the year. Your debt note is note 7, pages 40 to 42, details the changes in the district's debt over the year. The district paid $1.5 million in principal on the bonds during the year. You had general obligations series 2022 were issued in the amount of $36 million. The new lease standard, we booked the liability at the beginning of the year, so there were payments made on that lease liability of $1.7 million for the year. And there was a net decrease in the compensated absence liability of 31,000 this year. Your pension liability decreased 5.8 million, and your OPEB liability increased 527,000. So the big one there is the pension liability that decreased a lot this year. So as this pension liability gets funded, that will impact your portion of that liability. Note 8, pages 43 to 44, details the district's leases that the district has. Note 9, pages 44 to 49, details the pension plan. District's share of that liability is $47.3 million. Your post-employment benefit is note 10, that goes from pages 49 to 58. There's two OPEB liabilities. There's the one that you have with the PESER system, and there's also one just for your district. So those are detailed in that note. Other required schedules are pages 63 to 68. They mostly deal with the budget. There's two schedules for the GASB 68, which eventually will reflect 10 years as we go through this. So that's on pages 69 to 70. Your schedule of changes in the OPEB liability, pages 71 to 73 is detailed as well. There's the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, pages 74 to 75. And this details all of the district's money that was expended on federal grants during the year. A lot of stuff is passing through Pennsylvania.
When you expend more than $750,000 of federal dollars, you're subject to a single audit. And of course, we did have that. And with the pandemic, there were a lot of COVID related funds that you received that were needed and expended. So when we look at our federal awards, we're required to test compliance requirements on top of those financial requirements and make sure you're meeting these compliance requirements. And this year we looked at your child nutrition cluster. This is your breakfast and your lunch program. And then also the education stabilization fund, which there were many parts of that. And we looked at the compliance requirements for those as well. So on there, we didn't have any instances of non-compliance. We didn't have any weaknesses in our compliance internal controls over our compliance requirements. So very good job. So we did have to look at extensively more because of all these funds coming in.
But we were able to give the district an unmodified opinion on that as well.
So controls are in place. They're operating based on what we were looking at and what we. So.
If there were findings, they'd be detailed there. Those pages that do have would have the findings just say there were no findings. So
right, and this slide explains what the definition of a deficiencies are. So we look at any deficiencies in internal controls, and they might be really small. We look at them together to see if they raise to a level of bringing it to your attention, or if they would cause a material misstatement to the financial statements. So here's where we would let you know if we had any findings like that, and we didn't. Tiny little things that go on in every district, but those are, maybe a signature's missing or something, but nothing to any extent at all. So there's also a couple of loose letters there. There's a one-pager. That's my very favorite in the world because it says that we had no material weaknesses. So that's what we're allowed to say. So one page is very good. And the other one is the board letter, which communicates our responsibilities to you. It would let you know if we had any material adjustments. It would let you know if we had any disagreements with management. Also let you know if we had any trouble getting things, and if and the new standard, whenever we implement a new standard, it's all over the place, and we tell you that. Nothing there. So that was all good.
As always, the business office was gracious and very good to us, and took care of us when we were here. So yes. Fantastic experience. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for presenting, and thank you for doing it in a way that is not overwhelming. Right. Appreciate that.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. We have actually two other, it is mid-year, and I actually put these guys off a month a little bit because of, we had a construction presentation and we actually were thinking the auditors were going to join us in January, but that didn't work out. So I asked these guys, if you remember, last year I gave a report on where we are with some of our goals. And this year, instead of listening to me, I thought you'd want to hear from our administrative team. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing in elementary. I've mentioned the data what we're looking at in that half day and some of the things we've implemented there. So we're going to give Lee and Melissa a chance to talk a little bit more about what they're seeing and the great work that they're doing.
All right, so I'm going to just do a brief overview and then Lee's going to provide the entertainment. Just kidding. Just kidding. So we really looked at the umbrella of the long range plan goal 5, which is the next slide, which is just using standards aligned curriculum and rigorous assessments to produce the data that we need to improve instruction. So the next slide talks about just some of the things that we tried to put in place this year to help us achieve or move in the direction of goal 5. So we really started the year by talking about some common language with assessment with teachers. They were all kind of at different places. So trying to align them and trying to focus them into one direction, that's where we started. We looked also at our assessment calendar and we revised some of our assessments and really took a look at what do we need and where are we going and which ones are going to be the ones that we want to keep or change. We're using Ed Insight as our data warehouse. We've been doing a lot of work with them to get out of Ed Insight what we need to get out of it with as far as reports, and also training teachers how to look at those reports, how to get those reports, and what to do with that information. Lee did a lot of work on the schedule this year and just looking at what our different programs, the time allotments that different programs had, and we built our schedule around those times so that, if a program said it required 90 minutes, we made sure that was in the schedule so that those programs could be implemented with fidelity. We also had teachers working on pacing guides this year, the scope and sequence and pacing guides, and that was again to keep us all focused. So we didn't have to be at the exact same spot on the exact day, but we're all 4 elementary schools then, they developed those together in some of their grade level meetings at the beginning of the year so that hopefully they're following those and we're more aligned and we're more focused as a whole team of elementary. We've always had the reading intervention. This year we added math intervention, which I think is really going well. As well. And our goal this year for all students was that they all gain 1 year's worth of growth in reading and math. So I'm going to let Lee entertain you now.
Thank you. So one of the things that the previous slide did is there's a strategy to this, and we have to apply strategy and implement that. And so that plan is great. And, one of the famous quotes that's out there, we have one up there from John Hattie about you get a year's worth of growth out of a year's worth of input. So it's the simple input output phenomenon that has to occur. So that was one of the things. And then the other famous line in education that we use a lot is, without data, all you have is an opinion. So, we are really informing our practices through the use of data analysis. And I'm here to share, we went through our mid-year, and on our goal of a year's worth of growth, every grade level in both reading and math, grades 1 to 5, have made 50 points out of the 100 needed. So we are well on our way to making that goal happen for us. So it's a good thing for a celebration. Now, that's an average. right? We have some students who are well above that average and some who are below, but that's part of the strategy that you saw on the previous slide about how do we make that growth happen. And then the other piece to this puzzle that we have is we have to sustain this for multiple years. It cannot be just a one and done and we did it, checkbox, we're done. No, it's incremental growth that has to build on it and make that happen. So that's kind of that. So the last slide that we have for you is just an example of I know that's very small and unreadable, but you can see these are just two different grade levels, two different scenarios, but you can see that we're tracking and charting from our beginning of year to mid-year. The bottom one is 53 and I think Brooks in the way. I think the top one's like 68. So there are examples of us getting past that 50-point mark for it. So we are well on our way. We're excited about the work that's happening. We give a lot of credit to, all our support staff for helping support in our intervention programs that we're doing. The math interventionists, reading specialists, and most importantly, our teachers are working hard in the classroom and deserve a lot of credit for making that happen. So they're kind of following, we call it our playbook. They're following the playbook, and now we're starting to see the results happen with that. And then my last thing, since Melissa set me up for entertainment purposes, is did you ever hear the one about the statistician? Probably.
Oh, yeah. I just a couple of things I want to piggyback. You mentioned the teachers, and I think it's important to understand too that the data that some of the data has actually brought about conversations now. You shared with me one particular grade level that is using it, and this is the connection that needs to happen to change some things in their instruction. And that is the critical piece that we have to, keep revisiting and hitting that connection. But I also think, I don't know that they gave themselves quite enough credit, because this was designed, a lot of the common language from assessments, you could have asked what a benchmark assessment was to certain teachers, and they would have a different answer as other teachers were. The common language, the common schedule that, by the way, was set up so that we can carry it over to the elementary school. So it's one less change for our teachers next year, with the only exception, obviously, of sixth grade, who's up here, that we couldn't do much about. But elementary, their schedule is set up in a way that we can carry it over there. The uninterrupted blocks of time in order to give math and reading that instead of having to leave to go somewhere in the middle of it, that time that they to have the least amount of interruptions as possible, and to give them enough time to be able to hit on those things. And that scope and sequence that, frankly, we were a little bit all over the place. Some people have the belief that you got to keep going until everybody masters it, while others are more, staying on a pace. We needed to be a little more consistent with that. Those assessments drive it, because you want to, by the time you're giving those assessments, you want to have your kids prepared for them. But it's also important to lay that out for the entire year and kind of keep teachers on pace, keep your students on pace with their instruction. So while you hit on those things, I don't know that you guys gave yourself enough credit with starting in the summer with the training you guys did at the building levels, the instructional playbook conversation at the beginning of the year, and then touching on it at the January in-service, spending time, and then coming back here in February, we're going to revisit some of the assessments that we just recently gave in order to do that. So not only are teachers who are starting to, I think there's a few light bulbs that are starting to come on, but you guys also did a nice job of setting that up. So I just wanted to make sure I referenced that you guys worked at this too. So, but anyway, I think it's good. They're good steps. They do lend themselves toward goal number 5, the data driving instruction, and it was an important piece. Our other goal that we talked about this year was last year about this time, we were talking about some discipline things at the high school, and we had formed a discipline committee. started working through topics, and they chose to focus on cell phones to begin with. And then we did some other things with some hiring of our hall monitors and things like that. Pete, give us an update.
Well, I won't have any jokes, so I'll leave it at that aspect of things. It's hard to follow those kind of things. Next slide, please. But in the same respect, I also believe in data. Data is one of my wheelhouses with being a former math teacher. And one of the things that we did is just bot checks all along. And since we're at the beginning of February, we ran some reports here, and just as the simple numbers from the beginning of last school year to February 1 of last school year, we had 175 disciplinary incidents, and those are a variety of different incidents that come in from classroom disruptions all the way up from an altercation or things of that nature. But then when you look at the data that we have from the beginning of this year to February 1, just last week, we only have 55. That is a dramatic drop. And that's less than, over 2/3 decrease. So we have less than a third of what we had this time the year before. And going to the next slide, I wanted to cover the reasons why that is the case. It was a team effort. It wasn't just administration. It just wasn't teachers. It was both working together. And that was the 2 committees that we had done, the work that we spent a lot of the spring and even throughout the summer on the climate committee and the discipline committees. Communication, just continuing to increase our communications, not only with each other, but also with the students and with the parents, and keeping them informed on what's going on and what approaches we're trying to take. I think that goes a long way. I think I'm probably one of the only secondary administrators that does a weekly communication out there, also to promote the positive things that are happening in our building every day that you wouldn't know of unless we take the time to do so. And then just consistency, having that consistent follow through on everything you do day in and day out helps provide stability for the staff, and it also helps provide stability for us, and especially the students. When they have stability, it's a safe environment. It's a second home for them. So that's a lot of the things. Within the climate committee, obviously working on the connections that we have between the staff and the students, and building those relationships. And 2 examples that I put in there are the Valiant Bikes. We do those monthly Spark the Spirit days that we have, or we give out a treat, but it's just more than that. It picks up that spirit each month, and makes those kids feel like, okay, this is home. It's not just you're here just learning. They also care about us as individuals, and that's what we like to do with those aspects. In addition to, most recently, Dr. Kuiper, he's worked on having where the basketball players in the different sports have invited teachers to come out to the sporting events. That's just awesome when you can do that. It's more than just, hey, I saw in the newspaper that you guys won. I was actually there. And they really love that. They love the idea of it. We had actually one teacher, I think 3 kids asked for that one teacher. So it's those kind of opportunities, and just to see that brightness in their eyes, and even the teachers to feel special that they got invited to go there. Now I could go there every time, but just to be invited, it goes a long way to give that back to the teachers. And also along with that lines of just using a better use of time, there was a time when we had the 8th graders had like 3 study halls in their schedule. Well, one of the times that they would have as our win time, what I need, it became more of a, lack of a better term, just a study hall. And we wanted to make sure that we're actually using that, what they need. What they need is increase our scores here. So we ended up between Mr. Campbell and myself designing activities for them that will prepare them, and they work through every day that's going to prepare them for the PSSAs. So this making better use of our time to engage them. In terms of the discipline committee, as Dr. Missy indicated, we worked really hard on our cell phone procedures, and thank you for the approval and support of that. I was expecting some kind of kickback from the students or even the parents. The parents were like, yes, thank you. Even the students, I had many students come up to me and talk to other staff members saying, thank you. I'm able to focus on what I need to be here. I'm not stressed about what's on TikTok or whatever the case may be. I'm able to connect with my teachers. A lot of them unsolicited just came up and said, thank you for that aspect of things. They still can do that between periods at the high school. They can still get caught up on what's going on and during lunch. So they're not missing completely out, but during the class, they're able to focus on what they need to do to learn and also to engage with their fellow students and the teacher a lot better and much more easily. Also out of the discipline committee, we reformatted our discipline procedures, the organization of it. The content really wasn't changed, but just to highlight different aspects of things so that it came a little bit closer to eye level of, okay, if I do this, this is what's going to happen to me. But along with that same lines, unfortunately, in many of our procedures, we tell kids what not to do, but we forget to tell them what to do. So one of the things that when we were doing a lot of research in other schools is we came across different ways of making sure that they're aware of it. So one of the things that we developed was a pride poster, and it covers the 5 categories of personal responsibility, respect, integrity, dedication, and excellence. And you can actually see examples up here. Each area of the building, the library, the bathrooms, the hallways, the classrooms, the auditorium, were all broken down to say, in this environment, this is what you should do. And that helped them a lot to figure out, okay, instead of what not to do, what should I be doing with this time? What should I be doing here? How should I interact with others? And that helped out a lot, I would say, in many of those situations. And then the last 2, as Dr. Messer indicated, having that hall monitor start at the end of the year and continuing throughout this year was great. Proximity, if you've been in any other classroom or around even students in your own home, if you have a bunch of teenagers, proximity solves a lot of problems. Makes them think twice and might think they make good decisions. So having her out there in the hallways is just allowing students to, hey, I know where I need to be. I need to be in a class learning, not out here, not roaming the hallways and things of that nature. So that helped out tremendously. And Tammy Kay does even just more than that. She has supported so many different initiatives that we've done in the secondary. It's awesome to have that. So a lot of people, as you know, have multiple hats, and she's taken on those hats just to help and support in any different ways she can. And then just the normalcy, having a normal routine, coming here every day, knowing what to expect has gone a long way with our schedules this year. But it was definitely a team effort. It wasn't one group or another. It was even with the support of the board and making sure that you guys support us so that we can do our jobs the best to support our students. No joke.
Thank you, Dr. Ebert. I just a couple of things I'll piggyback there. One, you mentioned PSSA, but in reality, for me, it's more about getting kids to grade level and where they should be based on, there is some things that are dictated to us by the state. And one of those is our standards. And then our standards we use to form our curriculum and getting kids to as close to being on grade level so that they can be successful. And if that leads to better test scores, great. But in reality, it's more about them functioning on a day-to-day basis. Can they do the math that they need to be able to do? Can they write? Can they read and comprehend something? If we are focused on our curriculum and we're trying to get kids to perform at grade level, then the test scores kind of take care of themselves. But so I think that's something. I think, Dr. Ebert, I give you guys credit for some of the things you've tried, even to the point where tomorrow we're trying a new parent drop-off procedure. You should have all received communication about the parent drop-off procedure. And we moved all our buses over to the middle school. We're going to try dropping off where you guys probably park, most of you, where I'm parked. And we believe there's some things there that will make it, 1, safer for our kids to drive, and 2, easier to get in and out. So we're looking forward to that. If it's a big failure, you can blame it on me. But thank you for taking that risk, and we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping for the best. I do think the phone changes have been dramatic. I also think the other impact that it's had, remember we were talking too last year at this time with those constant Instagram social media posts, and I believe that has subsided dramatically. I haven't heard hardly anything about it. In the words of my son, Dad, it's boring this year. There's no there's not many fights. There's no, and we have some challenges here too with middle school kids and high school kids all together. I know this will come as a surprise, but middle school kids can be squirrely at times. And we also are very inclusive in terms of our, we have some special ed needs and things that those kids from time to time don't interact with others very nicely. And that's can be a challenge too. So appreciate your efforts, both elementary and secondary. Thank you guys for your reports. Appreciate that.
Is there any discussion from the board or questions for the administration?
I'll just share. I love seeing the data. I think, if you want to improve something, you measure it. And obviously you guys have started to measure things. And if you really want to improve something, start measuring it and expose it to people so they see how you're doing. So I love that part of it. And the other thing that came through from all three of you were you guys were all humble that it wasn't you, it was the team. And I think that's a cultural shift that, whether slow or not, we're starting to see, I think, in the school. So that's pretty cool to just see it come through in your presentations as well. So thank you.
Great. Yes, I would just like to say, I think many of us are starting our 4th year on the board, and over that time period, which was a challenging time period, I think this is exactly the type of data-driven reports that I was hoping to see. So just on a personal level, I think this is showing that the district is certainly moving in the direction that we're hoping for. So we really do appreciate it. Thank you for the hard work, for the administration, for the teachers, everybody. Thank you. Okay, we will then move on to the public comment period of tonight's meeting. I understand there is no public comment tonight. So we will move to the agenda for next week's board meeting. Yeah, we'll just go through Dr. Messinger.
Yeah, number 5 is our normal approval of minutes, the student activity count, and the cash disbursements. Number 6, we have our part B of the IDEA agreement that we have with our pass-through funds for IU13. That's an annual thing. We are looking to approve vital sanitation for our trash removal services for 2023 through 2025. We have this monitoring agreement is a new one, and it's attached for you to look through, but this is for the field house. If there were to be a fire, it is an automated reporting to Berkshire, who then would contact the fire department to come out. And that is not something that we've had in the past, but this would be an automated thing. Now they contact us, we know. So if for some reason, we're frying French fries down there and there's a lot of smoke and the alarm goes off and they call us and say, we got it under control. But that's a new thing with the new building. I expect, will there be the same type of thing for the elementary school as well? So, but that's the agreement with that system. We have on the next page, the children and youth and homeless agreement, letter agreement with us in the Region 2 Berks County Intermediate Unit. We also have our annual speech agreement that we contract out for. We do that every year. Any questions on anything in item 6? There's nothing in item 7. In extracurricular, there's some trips there, social studies to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and then the middle school TSA team to Seven Springs for the Technology Student Association State Conference, which is April 19th to the 22nd. The coaches list, there's a couple of highlighted additions that we had some open spots that are still being filled. It's for the most part ready to go, but it's not unusual to be doing that at this time of the year. Under 9, we continue to work through policies. We have the final adoption of policy 815 and then tentative adoption of some in the 600. Some of those are pretty short and straightforward. And then there's a library list of purchases for you listed there from Follett. Any questions on 8 or 9? Okay, under 10, we have some substitutes for you. Under 10.2, Katie Peters is going to be a mentor for Amy Taylor for the remainder of the year, who's filling in first grade. And then we have some retirements. And I'll kind of wait till next week maybe to talk through these, but you can see them there, and you know, we're excited for them, sad for us, but we did have some retirements this year. And I'll leave it at that. Any questions on 10? Okay, that brings us to new business, and there, you know, with growing facilities, with nice facilities comes you know, the challenge of people wanting to use the facilities. And so there was a request for some discussion on this, and President Nam, would you like to guide that?
Yes, thank you. So you have in your board packet was provided to you the policy, and it's actually in front of you. You have a hard copy of the policy. This is policy 707, which is our current facilities use policy. And then the attachment that we have is the current fee schedule that we have in place through the 2022 and 2023 school year. The question that was raised for potential discussion is, I think, excuse me, I think it's twofold. The first question is whether we as a board want to have the administration take a look at the fee schedule to make some modifications. The question is, are we charging enough for the use of these facilities, as Dr. Messinger said? And then I think the second question that was posed, and I'll leave this open to the directors to discuss, is whether we as a board need to take a look at our current use of school facilities policy and modify that. One of the questions that was raised was, how do we define community groups? The question is, does this policy effectively define community groups? What defines a group as being outside of that community? If you take a look at the policy 707, under authority. So one of the questions raised is, should the board have more say in what gets approved per use of the facilities? Currently, the way the policy is set up, if you look at those 4 categories of groups, there's school-related sponsored organizations such as student clubs, school-related adult organizations such as booster clubs, non-school related community activities with priority given to youth organizations, example being the Boy Scouts. And then the 4th group is any group not identified in 1, 2, or 3 above. Those 4 groups, some contain community groups, some we would say may or may not be community groups. But the way that the policy is currently written and the way that we currently operate is that we delegate to the superintendent the ability to schedule those without specific approval from the board. Then the last group, so it's not noted as number 5. So number 4 is the 1 through 4 are the groups that we currently delegate to the superintendent, and then the superintendent or the administration schedules those in order of priority. So that 1, 2, 3, 4 is the prioritization of the use of the facilities. There's a 5th group, which is the commercial or nonprofit, commercial or profit-making organization. Now, those under the policy require specific approval of the board. So when we see requests for approval come to the board, those are the ones that we're voting on presently right now. So the question is posed like, is the board comfortable with the current policy as it's written? Do we need to modify it? Do we need to provide some more specification as to what constitutes community groups? So those 2 questions, the first being, should we have the administration take a look at the facilities charges and the fee schedule and give those to us for a future vote? And then secondly, is there a consensus among the board that we should take a look at this policy and bring that up for a preliminary and final vote? So hope that's clear. If not, let me know. But I just open it up for discussion tonight. And I'll just open it up to all of you for observations.
I'd just like to start by asking what prompted the board member to bring this to our attention.
So it was a question regarding an outside group that it was difficult to decide whether this was a community group that fell into the categories 1, 2, 3, 4. Was it an outside community group? In speaking with Dr. Messinger, the two of us sort of concluded that it was in 1, 2, or 3, 1, 2, 3, or 4. It was not an outside for-profit group that we needed to specifically approve. The question was, should the board have approved the use of that facility by that group?
It's not a community group.
Right.
I think anyone that's had this discussion, it's not, we don't consider it a community group. I don't think it should be considered a community group, but it is currently registered as a nonprofit group. But then it sparks the question of, you do have, you want to make sure that all those other groups have the ability to utilize the spaces and that kind of thing. And, you don't want to have your own programs looking for space while someone, and there is a priority, but there does come a point in time where, if someone decides the day before, you don't want to kick people out either. And so, now I will say, just from an operational standpoint, the fee schedule thing is incredibly challenging, because when you look at it, you could do hourly rates, you can do day rates, you could do, we have a seasonal rate. If it's a non-community group, and in this particular group, it's $1,000 for a season. But what does that mean? I mean, they only can get gym time when we're not using it. But what is that? How much time does a season, how much, or if it's a day, is that 8 hours? Do you charge someone for 2 hours the same amount that you charge for 8 hours? It is and I don't know that there's a great answer, because I've looked at multiple fee schedules, and then there's other components to it. For instance, if I had a school district contact me in the fall, could we use your turf field? We have 2 of our teams made the playoffs, and they scheduled them for the same night, and we obviously can't host both at the same time. And they wanted to know if our facility was available. Well, our field is in fine shape, but the concession stand and bathrooms weren't open yet. So they chose to go elsewhere. But that technically wouldn't be a community group, although it would be a nonprofit. I had a travel organization contact me because it had rained 3 or 4 consecutive days. The playoffs were coming on a Saturday. They had these scheduled, and they couldn't play on their fields. They were underwater. They offered to give us $200 to be able to play their championship game here on our turf field. Obviously, there's no time there, to get it board approved. And by this, I wouldn't have needed it because it was not for profit. But we granted permission, and they gave us whatever that, and they used the field. So yeah, again, I'll say it again. There's a lot of, we talked about last time, we talked about the lacrosse tournament that we have in June, and they give us a $5,000 check for a weekend. And they allow us to run the concession stand, which now we should be able to do and be fairly profitable with. But as we continue to increase our facilities, it's going to come up, and it's going to come up probably way more often than it does now.
Thank you.
So maybe it's a question, comment on the fees. I think probably have to look at the fees. Costs have gone up for everything. So as complicated as that is, I do think we need to look at it. The other piece, I guess, on who uses the facilities. Do we have today, is there kind of a, for the fall sports period, all requests must be in by this period, and then we apply this criteria, meaning if there is anyone if there are any, NL groups that need it, they're going to get it first. And then we kind of move down through, like, is there a timing for a deadline to get it in? And then look, even if it's an NL group, because I think that's some of the challenge here, who gets it when? We have any.
informally have meetings. It's not a specific date, but we meet with the soccer club before the fall soccer season, and we talk about what fields do you need. We talk about the timing, the times that they can have it. Now, we do not schedule every single age group / team. We give them time slots, and they then fill in their time slots with the appropriate teams. I wouldn't want to micromanage what those organizations do. We do the same thing with VIBA, our basketball organization, and Little League puts in a request as well. They use the Lickdale field. They use the Fredericksburg elementary field. And remember, we're putting 2 new fields over so they're going to be requesting those, I assume, as well. And we use East Hanover too. So there are discussions about what are your needs, or here's our times available, and we allow them to do that. Not so much because frankly, sometimes we don't even know with some of the other groups. And I would want to maintain at least enough flexibility I certainly would not want to turn away anything within the realm of PIAA and or within the Lebanon Lancaster League, or even beyond that. We have used, before we had the turf, we would call people and say, listen, we have a playoff game on Tuesday. We don't have a turf field to practice on, but the game is on turf. Could we come use your field? Cedar Crest has numerous times turned on the lights and said, come on over. And I want the flexibility, whatever we do, we want the flexibility to be able to do that. I also think there are some, if the fee schedule is correct, at a place where we're comfortable, there is some benefit to being able to be asked, can we host a playoff game, or can you host this? We'll give you $500, because our space is whatever, our space is flooded or whatever. And to be able to do that, there's benefits for us as a district, as long as if it's not being used by us and we deem that there's not wear and tear. Now, we always have the caveat in this fee schedule as well, that if we have to do anything custodial, line fields, whatever, we may charge over and above whatever those costs are. So, you want to have some of that flexibility built in. At the same time, you want to make sure that you are granting those groups in that order, the facilities first. And that's tough too, because we would have a VIBA team may sometimes at the end of the season, they decide they want to go to a tournament and they want to get a couple extra practices in, but by then the schedule's kind of set, and then you got to reshuffle. So, there's challenges no matter how you do it.
Brooke, did you have something?
No, other than just to reflect on Gary's last comment, which is you'll have challenges no matter how you do it. Retaining some flexibility administratively is typically something that most districts try to focus on. And of course, prioritizing your direct community groups and defining that really clearly in policy. But districts do this a variety of different ways. It's policy driven, but as your facilities and increase in value and are increasingly sought after by groups, it's good to have a pretty streamlined process, because those requests will only increase.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the other concerns that was mentioned was so when we talk about the community groups and defining community groups, if we've got a group that's clearly not a community group, a question was raised, like, should we set a participation limit or I hate to use the word quota, I hate quotas, but a number of students from this district that should be participating in that, in order for us to allow them to use that facility. And if there are no Northern Lebanon students participating in that group, is that something that the board should approve, or is that something that based on a fee schedule should be adjusted upwards? The thinking there is that, as Brooke mentioned, as our facilities get nicer and as we build new ones, those are funded by taxpayers. And the question was, should we protect those taxpayer interests by ensuring that on some level they're being used by families in the district? So I hope I'm representing that correctly, but that was one of the other questions that was raised. So if we wanted to pursue this through a policy, we could do it through a policy change.
Yeah, and truthfully, I think that's an extremely valid point in terms of taxpayer money in the community, so you from a fee standpoint to discourage or if you're not discouraging to actually put some productive money into the rental of a facility. Next year, I believe the lacrosse tournament is going to generate $7,500 for us. I don't want to give that up, but I think that we probably are underpriced in some areas, some things, and need to, especially for the non-community groups.
Yeah, so a couple things. When I look at the policy, I would like to see any group not identified in 1, 2, 3 or above. I don't think there's a lot of those requests, but I'd like to be notified when somebody outside the community is using our facilities. Not that we can stop it or whatever, but I would like to see that. Instead, delegation authority, but I still would like to see, because nonprofit can be a misnomer. There's plenty of nonprofits out there that, just aren't good organizations. So who's to say in the future that different nonprofits can't use our request and we'll never see it? And when I look at the fee schedule, I went around and I looked at the other counties, and the biggest, the thing that jumps out at me the most is our any gymnasium rate for $1,000 a season for group 3. So that's pretty wide open. Any gymnasium, I imagine that would take a good deal of coordination with whoever for gym time, custodians to clean it up, facilities to be used. We're going through it right now. We're building a lot of real nice things, and who pays for it? Our taxpayers do. So I think the people primarily benefiting from that should be Northern Lebanon students and Northern Lebanon taxpayer families. I know this fee schedule came out in September, and I think that was a meeting where, it's September, opening a school. I don't think there was a committee and a board meeting that month. So it kind of like, man, that was my time to take a look at that, but I didn't. And it's such a new document. And isn't this the first time we did this?
No, this schedule's actually been in place for years.
Oh, really?
We updated it last year. It was actually $200 a season or $250 or something like that. I upped it to $1,000. I think the season fee I would agree with you, Dave, that I think the concept of a season fee we do with some of the other groups, and I have really absolutely no issue with talking to a Northern Lebanon group like the soccer club and saying, listen, we're not going to nickel and dime you every single night for every single field. And frankly, I wouldn't want to keep track of that necessarily, but to say these are approximately our costs. So here's a season fee. And then if we're going to paint lines, we're going to, for our groups. For outside groups, I think one of the models that I've seen, and you had showed me one where they remove that option for outside groups altogether. There is no seasonal fee. So when you start to look at it on a day-to-day basis, you got to really want it. If another school district, I think, is actually less per day. But there's no seasonal option. So if you're paying $200 a day and you want it 10 days, that already you're at $10,000 or $2,000. So that's probably what maybe most throws it out of whack, is that seasonal option.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about is, maybe there's organizations that have 200 kids and 10% of them Northern Lebanon students. I don't know if we should be charging only $1,000 a season for, March to June. When I look at the other surrounding districts, Elko, $300 a day, Anvil, they have an hourly rate of $110 per hour. Palmyra is $900 a day. And Cornwall, Lebanon is like 670 or 435. Nobody else provides a season rate for group 3. I think that it's just rolling out the red carpet to people who aren't paying for it. That's it.
I have, are you done?
Yeah.
Sorry. I have some questions. Oh, what's going on here? Has scheduling legitimately been a problem in the past? Like, have we come head to head with certain groups?
You could
needing-
build 5 gyms and scheduling would be a problem. Yeah. If you build it, they will come. Scheduling is, we use our gyms from 2:30 till 9:30 at night, every night. In the spring, it's easier, a little bit because a lot of the sports are outside, but now we have boys volleyball, so they use it, and club, they do some off-season club stuff. And our basketball teams, our high school teams start to do some open gyms come April, May too. So it's not as packed in the spring as it is in the winter, but in the winter it is, whether it's our youth program or our Northern Lebanon travel for 5th grade and 6th grade, both boys and girls, our middle school programs, both boys and girls, our varsity teams, both boys and girls, and then the auxiliary gyms used all day long pretty much from wrestling too. So it is, and then on top of it, our elementary schools are utilized as well almost on a daily basis. So it is, there's a lot of pieces there. Yeah. They get used heavily.
Am I correct in hearing that what you're mentioning is mostly NL groups?
Yeah, all of those in the winter. I don't know that we really have outside groups asking for time in the winter so much. It's more the off-season stuff. The sports trend nowadays is, you do your middle school, you do your school affiliated seasons, and then everybody now has these AAU basketball teams that they, do in the spring and the summer, or travel soccer teams, or now there's volleyball programs for the same kind of thing. And everybody has these off-season things that they're trying to get fields and gyms for now as well. And that's what creates a problem, because those are, I don't know that there's too many of those that are just Northern Lebanon kids. They're mostly, there could be Northern Lebanon kids participating in them, but a lot of them are not just Northern Lebanon kids.
But NL groups automatically get first dibs, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so how is this a problem? I guess is my question. If NL automatically gets priority, then why are we concerned about possibly letting outside groups reserve the facilities?
For me, it becomes a problem. It mainly becomes a problem for us when we put together the schedule and then something impacts that schedule. Whether if it's an outside facility, it's rain, and then everything that was scheduled that day has to be on a different day. And now you're telling out other groups that, hey, you can't, you still go back to the priority, but you're shuffling a lot of things around in some cases. I'm not necessarily complaining about the amount of juggling. We have a program that does it, so it helps us with it. But it does become, we're utilizing everything heavily. There's wear and tear. There's, and so to make sure that it's one thing for our taxpayers to use our facilities that they've paid for. It's another thing for people from the outside, I'd say, to just make sure that that we're charging whatever the reasonable amount is. And I don't know what that magic number is, to be honest. I mean, we have some examples of other Lebanon County schools, but I went, when we did this, I don't think it had been touched for a long time. Pat Health, yeah, it had been the same. We upped some things and then we upped them again, but we may not have hit the right mark yet.
Is that procedure of priority and shuffling working?
Yeah, I mean, it's work for us because you got to call people and say, hey, you can't use it tonight. We had to do this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's not working. I think it's been more of just more of a perception of why are these people that go to other school districts using our facilities. I think that's more what I've heard.
So I'd like to propose this. I think that there's a path forward for developing a proposed policy that we obviously wouldn't vote on tonight, but based on Director Klein's comments and some of the other ones, I think there's a policy that we could draft for vote and review that could break out that current number 4 category into more defined community groups or non-community groups. And then we could draft that policy to expand board approval to certain of those groups. I'm thinking, to Dr. Messinger's point, maybe we could exclude PIAA, that could be within the administration's authority to approve. But I think we can put together a proposed policy for review. I would like to suggest that we do that policy and the fee schedule either at the end of this school year or for the beginning of the next school year. My big concern is I don't want to really modify anything that groups have relied upon for this school year. That's just my own personal opinion. And if anyone objects to that, please speak up. But my proposal will be that we work on putting together a draft policy that addresses some of the concerns that we've heard for a future vote, and then ask the administration to modify the fee schedule at June 1st or something like that, so that we're tying it into a school year so that outside groups or even our community groups aren't changing course midway. Is there any major objection to putting together something like that or proposing something like that?
And to be clear, we from the time that with COVID, nobody was using anything, so that wasn't a problem. From the time that ended and we started opening things up, we knew this needed to be done. So we are putting it together annually for you. You will see it annually. However, to Dave's point, it would make sense to take effect July 1st because that's when the fiscal year starts. So having it in June might be more appropriate in terms of timing, rather than after the school year starts.
I guess the only thing I'd like to say is I get that if it's like mild adjustments, but it's just so grossly out of whack with everything else. I'd like to see it changed sooner than go through another season of wear and tear and not getting reimbursed for it. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's only fair to wait till July to make those adjustments. But I have some additional questions though. Do we feel like we're actually losing money with the fees that we have in place? Like, is this actually costing the district to allow groups to use our facilities?
I think that depends on how rough the group is on the facility. I mean, I can't say that, to come in and use the gym for 2 hours is probably much wear and tear. I'm a little more protective of the turf because there is some grooming and things that need to be done with that field, and it has a life expectancy. And at some point, just like the track, we'll need to, we'll need to replace it. Certainly not at the cost it took to install it, but you have to replace the turf at some point in time. Sometimes there's wear and tear to the grass and things outside as we're trying to, groups come out on a Monday night and then it requires us to do some more seating and top dressing and things like that. It depends on It really depends on what they're using and how big the group is, how often they're using it. There's a lot of factors there.
And then I think my last question is, I don't know anything about the gym, but I have heard kind of informally that some of our fees are actually greater than some of our neighboring school districts. Before we make adjustments, I think it would be good to gather the fees of what some of our local school districts are also charging. And we've been talking about the taxpayers, which I think is important. But our schools are not funded only on local taxpayers. We do receive state and federal money. And so I think we need to kind of think about that a little bit. You know, if Topahakan or Lower Dolphin or Elko if students from those districts are coming as part of community groups and using our facilities, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Anything that keeps kids involved and motivated and growing and learning, even if it's not in their home district, I don't think there's any harm in that at all, because our community isn't just NL. Our community is Lebanon County and Pennsylvania. You know, we're all in theory working together. So I'm not sure that we need to be kind of too discriminatory and try to make a big buck just because they live outside of our district lines. That's just how I feel.
Can I say something quick? Everyone brought up good points. Just a few things, like I'm glad we're going to look at this later in the year. I think it's fair to look at it this summer, just because people have kind of been told certain numbers, and we should commit to that until the summer when we revisit it. But a few things that were said that caught my attention. I think we need to use a common sense approach to this. Like when Gary said that in years past, if we had a playoff game on turf, Cedar Crest offered us their field. Like, that's common sense, even though we're not Cedar Crest students or coaches, they gave us, you know, the opportunity to use their field. So those things should continue, I believe, when we talk about this new policy. I think I've talked to 3 ADs that have been ADs for a combined 100 years, and all 3 of them said consistently, and this is totally against what you're saying, Michelle, but I'm just giving you their perspective, but they said, charge whatever you have to keep outside organizations out of your school, because it's nothing but a headache. And that's just what they're saying. So I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's what, if I'm on this committee, that I will push for. I'm just saying 2 of them are National Athletic Directors of the Year. And like, they just say your facilities take a beating, and taxpayers get really frustrated when, you know, we're making Elko or Topahakan kids better, and then we foot the bill for it. And another thing I kind of look at with this is, like Melissa knows, why should Clark Schaefer and Palmyra build a $2 million club volleyball facility for Prevail if he could use Palmyra's gyms or Northern Lebanon's beautiful new gyms for free and charge kids $2,000 each? You know, Palmyra's in Lebanon County, they're part of our community. So that's kind of like the fine line, you know what I mean? As far as why can't Rusty Wallace make, you know, $50,000 a year running an off-season club? And, you know, other people have to, Hempfield spent $1 million on a beautiful wrestling facility, not Hempfield School District, a community person that they wrestle at, and it's gorgeous. But why should that guy have even done that if he could have just used Hempfield's gym? So like, there's a difference between making money off taxpayers and using their facilities and not. And that's something I look forward to discussing. I'm not saying, you know, what's right or wrong or anything, but that's the fine line. And like, those questions you asked are very legitimate. I'm just trying to answer them too. Gary did a nice job answering them, but like, that's what I think you have to look at. I don't think Mr. Rizzo does this for money. I know what he charges, and it's, I think, $600 for the year. And there's other AU programs that charge $1,500 to $2,000 for the year. So he's not doing it for the money, but bottom line is there's a little bit of money being made. And I would just like to look at it. Gary had brought up some schools do like, I think at Hershey, it's an 80-20. If 80% of the kids involved are Hershey kids, they like waive the fees or it's reduced. And then contrary what you just said, maybe if kids from anywhere, we should open it up, and maybe that's not wrong either. So I'm not saying you're wrong, but I would definitely like to look at numbers. And it's just, even looking here, they talk about coaches that run summer camps. They have to pay a $200 flat fee. I know this was a huge thing at Hershey years ago, and because coaches were making, I'm talking like $20,000 over the summer running camps and stuff. And now the school board made different policies for that. And now if you run camp, you have to do it for whatever the per diem is, $36 an hour for the day, for all the hours you put in. You can put in for that fee. And who knows? I mean, why shouldn't you, if you run a great camp, be able to make 20,000 in a year? It's what you offer, but I see the other side of it too. So I look forward to this summer talking about this. And
I think that's the difficult thing. I think you can make scenarios. You can think of groups. I can think of groups that I would have, no issue. It's, they're not charging anybody anything, and they're just looking for a place to have a band practice, or something. And then you can have other groups. I've seen what Nate's talking about. I've seen certain travel programs where they're charging kids, $2,000 might be light, Nate, $3,000-$4,000, and making all kinds of money off of those kids, and then looking to get as cheap of a place as they can. So but all of those would fit technically in the same group, potentially, because you can run a nonprofit group and still make money, and that's part of the problem.
Can you expand upon that more?
Yeah, you can, if you're the nonprofit organization can pay a director up to, there's a dollar amount.
I think it's, I looked at AAU sports, and I think a head coach for an AAU sport can make up to $45,000 a year under a nonprofit. So it's permissible to pay. I mean, it's true with any nonprofit, you can pay salaries to people that run them. So, yeah.
So that's part of that's what complicates some of it, is that we have a pickup group of guys that come and play soccer out here. I don't know where they're from. They just come on Sunday afternoons and play soccer. They don't reserve the field. They just come and play. I mean, same thing with our track. People come and run on our track all the time. I think most of them are community members and they use them, and we've never discussed not allowing that. But there's just so many variables to it, which is what makes it, I think, difficult for me sometimes. I'm not really complaining. Again, the fee schedule, I think it's worth always looking at that annually to see, are we, and talking with the director of buildings and grounds, are we paying out exorbitant amounts in facility care because of these groups? And just making sure that there's no cost there. And if there are costs, we should be by passing on some of those costs.
I don't think I really realized that I knew it, but I didn't put it together that an organization could be nonprofit and somebody's still making a boatload of money off of it. In my mind, I was thinking nonprofit and thinking all of the adults were volunteers. So I think having some thresholds in place might be appropriate in that realm. But I still would like to be as inclusive and allow as many kids to use our facilities as possible.
So I think the procedural path forward for us is to draft a policy. And I think even as I've heard, if there's going to be more board approval, it would still be up for a vote. So that use of those facilities would be up for a vote by the board. So I have not heard a request for a policy that excludes anybody, just a policy that might be a little more expansive to board approval. So, and I think that's what we can do. I still would like to hear from more directors as to the timing of that. I've heard a couple of competing things, should we wait for the summer? Or should we move forward now?
Yeah, I would agree. We wait for the summer.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't wait until the summer to start looking at the policy.
Right. No,
I'm in agreement with not implementing a new policy until the summer, but I wouldn't hold anything off until then.
Yeah,
I think
correct.
it's something, I think it's something we should definitely look at. I would really like the idea of better defining those community groups and certainly setting up a better fee schedule for those certain community groups. I like the idea of what Nate brought up earlier as far as almost pricing ourselves out of problems. So, I mean, if we price ourselves just right, it might inhibit some of those outside groups that cause the issues to not want to participate. But I also think it's something that we should look at, not necessarily to make money, but more or less just to show the value of what we have here at Northern Lebanon and what we will have in the future, once we go through with some other things. But certainly still making it available for all the Northern Lebanon groups and community members here.
And I think it's going to be important, Brooke's still with us, that in that policy, we have to be very careful about the voting and discriminating between one group or another. And Brooke's smiling. Did I?
Yeah, I mean that's the question of the hour. I mean, there are types of moves you can make and you can prioritize. Anytime the school opens its doors, it has to do so non-discriminatorily, and obviously to make accommodations are required under federal law relative to certain types of groups. But as long as those groups don't fall into any protected classes and there's not overt discrimination on any of those protected reasons, we're in good shape. And I think, again, discrimination is one part of this. I think there are so many factors many of you targeted, which is wanting to be a community place, wanting to make sure you're ensuring all your costs are covered and maybe making some money, making sure you're protecting the future of your facilities and repairs that may need to be made from use, and sort of better defining like how you want your campus to be used, like as part of your larger mission and vision for the school district. And then I think enabling the administration to be able to make clear decisions based upon a policy. A lot of work can go into defining different types of groups, but you want that to be able to be administered easily by an administrator who's reviewing an application and making a decision.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Great discussion. Appreciate it. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. We'll put that together. We'll be working on that now, and then we'll have it up for a vote prior to the summer so they can take effect in the summer. Okay. If we vote for it. All right. Item 12. Dr.
Just one thing. I want to just thank Ace Distribution Center and they worked with Mr. Banyas and donated over $10,000 worth of items to our shop classes, power tools, and to tech ed, and really grateful for the work one of our parents, Mrs. Emborski, did to facilitate that. But really nice. There was a picture on social media, but really nice thing that they did for the school, and appreciate their partnership with us there.
Is there something we can do to formally thank them, to give them a token? Okay, great. Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Have a good night, everybody. Thanks,
Brooke.